Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. And welcome to our webinar on adding sparkle to your letters to the editor. This is Barbara Gottlieb. I'm the Director for Environment and Health in the National Office of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And this webinar was, it was originally set up as a training for our climate ambassadors. So welcome any climate ambassadors whom we have on the phone with us. We also decided to open it up to the broad PSR membership, thinking that might as well share the wealth. For those of you who aren't familiar with our Climate Ambassador program, it's a program for people who want to volunteer to take actions that are kind of above and beyond those that we often ask of volunteers. So these are people who will either at our suggestion or often on their very own initiative will write letters to the editor. They will also write longer articles, op-ed articles. They may testify before the EPA. They take on really rather challenging tasks, and we are delighted to have them as part of PSR, delighted to work with them, and always looking for ways to help them be more effective. So tonight's presentation is one of those efforts. I'm going to be mainly your host or your hostess or whatever. I'd like to thank Julia Morgan, who is also on the national staff and is our web manager there. She is our ever reliable technical backup for this webinar and other webinars. Thank you for being with us, Julia. And introduce Gregory Lopez, who is working with PSR and has been working with the ambassadors over the course of the summer and the fall. Greg, you want to give a wave? And he'll introduce himself. In fact, why don't we, well, let me just give you a quick overview of our agenda for tonight, and then I'll have Gregory introduce himself. So we're going to be talking about how to write a letter to the editor and how to maximize your chances of getting that letter published. We also are encouraging you, perhaps in the spirit of the season, but not solely that, to add a little bit of sparkle to your letters. And that's something that we'll go into a little bit of detail on later on. To the extent that we give examples about how you might write a letter, we're going to be talking about a topic that's very timely. It's the Build Back Better Act, which is, as you probably know, legislation that has been passed by the House of Representatives and is now before the US Senate. It covers a lot of what has been called the social infrastructure for the country. And it's also our absolutely best bet to get meaningful action on a large scale to address climate change. So the Build Back Better Act invests in communities, it invests in climate change, it invests in jobs, and it invests in justice. And these are not just nice things to have, these are really essential to the well-being of our country. So in terms of the climate work that it would do, it would invest in creating good paying union jobs. It centers justice and equity. It invests in clean energy. And it's been estimated that it would save families $500 a year on their energy bills. So we're pretty excited about the Build Back Better Act. We feel it's really essential to get it passed in as intact a form as possible, as we can, getting it through the US Senate. So as we talk about how to write a letter, especially as Gregory talks about that, I'll be tossing him questions and then he'll largely be answering. We may use examples that focus on the Build Back Better Act. But be assured, for all of you on the call, the advice we give you is much more applicable, much more broadly applicable than just to that one bill. A lot of what you'll be hearing is actually fairly common to all of the letters that you'll write and that we hope you'll be writing in the future. So with that brief introduction, let me turn it over to Gregory Lopez. Gregory?
Great, thank you, Barb, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone on the call. Some of you may recognize me or have been on an email thread, and maybe we've worked together as well this past summer. But for those that are new to hearing me or to interacting, it's a pleasure. I have about 10 years of experience working in the climate and environmental space, both in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. Most notably, I led the development of the climate program at the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, where I managed grant-making communication activities around advancing equitable clean energy, conservation, and sustainable food solutions. And now I've been working alongside Barb, as she mentioned, in the environment and health program for PSR this past summer. Generally, that has entailed working with health professionals like yourselves around the country to speak out in support of clean energy and effective climate action. And again, as Barb mentioned, a lot of this has been around the Build Back Better Act or infrastructure bill or all the various iterations that it went through up to this point. And a lot of that has been organizing calls or actually helping prepare opinion pieces on some of these key issues and working with you all to help tell these stories. So it's great to be here, and I hope we can add a little bit of flavor and sparkle to your holiday season LTE writing.
Okay, thanks, Gregory. So we're about to plunge in. Let me just say that we will have, Gregory and I will be engaging in this conversation for a while, and we are also reserving a fair amount of time for your questions, answers, suggestions, and also your experiences, which we'll turn to a little bit later in the program. If you have questions, I'd like to ask you to go to the Q&A box, which you'll see in the bar at the bottom of your screen underneath our pictures, and just type in your questions, and we'll get to them. We'll get to them when we can. By the way, apologies for any confusion about the time. It did begin at 5 o'clock, and we'll wrap up 5 o'clock Eastern, excuse me, and we'll wrap up in 1 hour. So let me begin, Gregory, with a really simple, easy question, but just to kind of ground us all. What's a letter to the editor? And more importantly, why should we bother writing them?
Sure. Well, that's a basics to start, right? So yeah, so a letter to the editor is it's an editorial piece. It's a way, it's a short response that can go that gets published in your local news outlets. Traditionally, this has been in print, but now publications are online. So on the editorial page online, you can find a host of both of broadly opinion pieces, but letter to the editors are very short, specific opinions responding to key issues that you can find that you are able to share and get published in the outlet.
Right. I mentioned, Gregory, in talking about our climate ambassadors, that they might write letters to the editor and they might write op-ed articles. Could you just distinguish for us between an LTE and an op-ed?
Yeah, I think that's easy to get confused. So the biggest thing is the length, right? LTEs are very short. They're usually 250 words or less. And these sort of guidelines we'll get on a little bit later, but they can vary between publications. But usually they're very short. Op-eds, on the other hand, are usually in the range of anywhere from 600 to 800, maybe sometimes 900 words. And that's kind of the key difference. So with that in mind, the understanding a way of differentiating them is that with the length provided, there's a way you can share and present information. And something as short as 250 words or less, you really have to be very specific in what you're saying and what you're writing about. So LTEs are very particular and focused with a topic, usually a single topic, whereas an opinion, an op-ed, it can be much broader and could touch on various points and usually can end with a call to action, which, usually, especially for our purposes, can hope to rally around support in favor of bills or push your legislator to act on key initiatives.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I think I've heard about a letter to the editor is that it's usually written in response to something that people see in the newspaper. And that certainly, I think, increases your chances of being published. And sometimes you don't see an article that really addresses the topic that you want to write about. Could you give us some examples of how you might find something perhaps related to other aspects of climate change that you could reference in your letter and then kind of pivot from to talk about the need for the Build Back Better Act or other concrete legislation?
Yeah, and I think that's usually key in making again, sort of we're talking about what makes an LTE sparkle, right? And I think that's usually key in trying to get across your message. We want folks to really think about sometimes local issues, sometimes key things that they've seen in the news that might be related. So again, we're referencing the Build Back Better Act, and a lot of it is around infrastructure or EV developments, or even impacted communities investment for climate resilience. So there's a broad array of things within that bill that you can talk about. And you can find, a particular reference to impacted communities, such as low income or communities of color in your area, in your residence, that you might be able to reference for an LTE. And again, the idea is you want to be as specific and very focused as possible, so you can kind of take this broad idea of BBB and kind of synthesize it down to really focusing on this one angle approach.
Right. And so I'm thinking of the newspaper that I read. There's been a lot about the high cost of housing in the Washington, D.C. area. You might be able to even take something as apparently remote from climate change as that and talk about the need for housing that is accessible, that is healthy, that is safe. And oh, by the way, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had solar panels on the roof? That would be good for the climate and also help bring down our utility bill. I hope that Congress can get itself together to act on the Build Back Better Act and make that available to us.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example, and one that really, again, highlights the various ways that climate and environmental issues intersect with other key issues, right? And it's not just we're talking about pollutants in the sky. We're also talking about healthcare costs. We're talking about housing. We're talking about transportation. I mean, there's a wide array of issues where you can approach the topics in something like the Build Back Better.
Mm-hmm. You did just now make a passing reference to health. Of course, most of our climate ambassadors and a lot of our members are themselves health professionals. And for those of us who aren't health professionals, we're all concerned about our health. How would you see linking the Build Back Better Act to the health voice? What would you encourage health professionals to be saying? Or perhaps the better question is, how should they be speaking so as to make their health voice apparent?
Yeah, and I think so. There's a few things I would say. I think your voice needs to come across as natural, right? It is very real. I don't think being overly technical, providing a lot of data is really necessary in LTE. Again, not that it's wrong, but you only have so many words you can use for an LTE, and that's better served for an op-ed where you can provide data and other statistics. An LTE is very focused, so you want to appeal using your voice of reason, your real emotions that you are feeling in regards to something you deeply care about. That could be your patients, that could be things in your field that you see every day. I mean, we look at what happened in the Pacific Northwest this year with the span of heat waves that killed almost 200 people, and there were temperatures at 124 degrees. I mean, those are very real, raw numbers that don't take too much to explain, and there's a lot that can get behind that. So, the idea is really trying to personalize this and make it something that can get across your point as a health professional, but really what matters to you most.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about how to get a letter published. First, let's start with the mechanics. I want to write a letter. I know that my newspaper is online. Some folks get it delivered to the door. How do I even start in terms of figuring out? I've got my topic in mind, but how do I figure out how to get a letter actually published in my local newspaper?
Yeah. So the first step is to find your local news outlet, right? I mean, if it's in your scenario, if you know that you have, for me, the LA Times that shows up to my doorstep, all right, well, I can look them up and easily Google or see what it takes to publish an LTE. So one of the first things you want to look at are the guidelines. And again, most of this is strictly around word count, and you're expecting 250 words or less. So you really want to fit within that. Again, it's a very simple denial if you submit something over the basic guidelines. So you really want to adhere to them. They're very simple and straightforward. The other thing I would recommend is sitting down, and perhaps if you're already reading this newspaper, or you're searching a new newspaper or a news outlet that you can submit something to, read the editorial page, right? Look at previous LTEs that have been published. Look at the types of topics. Look how people are framing their points and their discussions, and on what sort of topics are getting published on a weekly basis. So, I think that can help inform and help structure what you write and what you expect to submit for publication to that outlet. So a little bit of doing research on basic guidelines, but also doing some research on what that news outlet likes to publish and what they tend to put out there.
You mentioned these guidelines. Where are people going to find those guidelines?
Yeah, so again, depending on what you're looking up, a simple Google search can say, Los Angeles Times submit opinion piece. Usually this will take you to an editorial page that'll differentiate between op-eds and LTE. Sometimes it takes you directly to the editorial page where it lists what's being published, and sometimes that's a sublink that you might have to look around on the web page that shows guidelines, or submit your own LTE or op-ed. And at some point during that submission process, there will be those guidelines published that not only tell you what to adhere to, but also how to submit them, which usually by email. Sometimes, again, depending on the outlet, it can be a box, a submission form on the actual website.
Right. I know from my own experience, they will often ask things like your address, which won't necessarily appear in print, but they want to know if you're a local reader, and they may have other criteria. They may ask if you've published a letter in the last 6 weeks or 2 months, things like that, so that they keep their flow of letter writers rotating and varying. I do know that for some of our most prolific letter writers, living in a small town is actually a real advantage, because the number of people who read the newspaper is smaller. That means that's their core, if you will, of potential letter writers. And sometimes I think there just aren't that many people clamoring to write a letter for a small newspaper. It's different if you're trying to get into the New York Times. That's pretty tough. But sometimes being in a smaller media market is an advantage, because they won't have as many letter writers, hence the competition for getting your letter published may be less, and so you may be able to publish more often.
Yeah, and I would also add, perhaps trying to identify some of the smaller news outlets in the larger markets as well, right? So perhaps it's not the New York Times, but the New York Daily news outlet XYZ, right? Whatever it might be, you might get a better chance because there might be less submissions and it's less well known. But of course, that comes with less readers looking at your LTE or op-ed. So there's a bit of a hit you take on that.
Well, let's turn to this. Excuse me, excuse me, everybody. Let's turn to this question of sparkle. I imagine most of us have had the experience of writing a letter to the editor and it doesn't get published. And you never really know why that is. It could be that they just had a lot of letters coming in that week, or they had a lot of letters on your topic. It could be that they didn't like what you said. We actually had a question from one of the people on the webinar who said, I've been turned down more than once by my newspaper, and they tell me they don't like my worldview. What does that mean, and what can I do about it? They said an editor at the paper says he gets a lot of complaints about my worldview as expressed in my letters. Well, we don't really know what that means. Gregory, would you care to speculate? I can add my speculation too.
It's hard too, but I would say, I think perhaps looking at if they're talking about a worldview, right? It's a very broad topic, and perhaps there's too much in whatever's being submitted. And I could be completely wrong, but just again going back to the point of being more focused and trying to stick to a single topic. I mean, again, there's a lot all of us feel and a lot of us have in our opinions, and we would love to share. But really, what an LTE and what editors are looking for are those that are very, very focused and really can harp on one single idea and get that point across in just a short and succinct way.
I think that that discipline is very important in a letter to the editor. I had a different theory about what might be meant by worldview. It may be a sort of polite roundabout way of saying we don't like your politics. That maybe your politics don't match those of some of our readers or perhaps some of our advertisers. In a situation like that, since you are entirely at the mercy of the editors as to whether or not your letter will be published, your chances are probably pretty low. But let's talk a little bit about Sparkle. So I think that there are a couple of things that can help you get your letter published. And Gregory has already referenced some of them. Be clear, be succinct, be focused. But I think the other thing, and you were saying this earlier, Gregory, is be you. I think a letter really has a better chance of being read, being appreciated when you as a unique individual, your voice and your personal experiences really come through. So Gregory, any further thoughts on that or any examples?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. I mean, I'd love to just, as I was thinking and preparing for today's call, today in today's news, I don't know if anyone has seen, or perhaps Barb, you saw Elon Musk was trending in reference to the Build Back Better Act. And he was quoted as saying we should can it, we shouldn't pass this thing. Which is, on surface level, you see, well, hey, this guy's a pioneer and, has done for EVs and has, did a lot for solar. Is that accurate? What's going on? So for me, that bothered me, that bugged me, that got my emotions stirring, right? There you have a guy who has benefited or did benefit from a lot of incentives early on, and what helped gain popularity for Tesla. And now he's advocating against a bill that would increase incentives and try to get people to purchase more EVs. But the idea is that part of the bill would raise incentives to $12,500 versus the $7,500 that Tesla had before. And this would be for primarily union-led factories that are producing these EVs. So there's a little bit of this internal politics and business that is really muddying the waters. And frankly, that bugs me. And exactly what I just said, I would put that into an LT in my own words, right? That to me is a topic that just like irks me, right? In a way where, in a place where we're supposed to be really united, we don't have much time. People are dying every day. We're seeing these health costs just skyrocket. It's such a problem. That to me is something I would write about in my words that I just shared with you all. It might not have been the most succinct, but on paper, I would have cleaned it up. So I think, overall, again, I think that's just trying to be a very raw example of what I think an LTE should be, right? It's a timely response to something in the news, has a very clear and direct angle, and it would be in my own words.
Let me point out one more thing that you just said. You were saying you heard about this position that Elon Musk has taken and it irked you. What I hear there is emotion. And I would really encourage people to allow emotion to enter your letter. I don't mean be angry. I don't mean, anything over the top, but a bit of sting, if you will, can be something that can really make the point of your letter come through very clearly. On the other hand, another kind of emotion or appeal to emotion is through humor. So people love to read things that are humorous. And I don't mean that we're making light of a serious topic, but if you can inject a note of humor or even a note of lightness into your letter, and it's, again, your voice and it's authentic, then I think that the editors will recognize, hey, I got a kick out of this letter, so will our readers. That's what they're looking for. I mean, face it, we're providing them with free content for their newspaper. They're interested in what's going to sell. If they think that your letter will sell, you're more likely to get it printed. What about, Gregory, what about taking some kind of a seasonal approach? Are there things that, I mean, we're in December, a lot of faiths and cultures have celebrations going on in this month. Anything there that we could riff on that would tie back to climate change and taking those very necessary steps for reducing greenhouse gases?
Absolutely. I mean, the various angles you can play here. I mean, and this can be dependent on your faith background. If you're a person of faith, I mean, you have the holiday season where you can talk about this sort of inherent will that in order to help better the lives of people, we have to act on climate change. There's an angle there. There's also an angle where, hey, it's the time of giving. It's the time of giving back. And we had Giving Tuesday, last week, right? This is a place where we want to support nonprofits, support people doing mission work, and really take care of folks and key issues that we all are supposed to care about. So it's sort of a good time to really try to connect and use these timely seasonal things that we all are celebrating or have some reference to, that you can sort of distill and make that as part of a caring theme in your LTE. Again, the idea is just to make it relevant, to make it timely. You don't want to write one LTE sort of submitted each month. If it doesn't get published, maybe change a few words. That's not being very effective. You really want to make it timely, make it with what's going on in the world, and really try to hone in on something that speaks to you.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I heard in what you were saying is that there sometimes there needs to be an element of kind of imagination in your letter in terms of how you take the topic, whether it's the holidays or Elon Musk, and turn it to the topic that's of most interest to you. So not to dwell too long on the holidays, maybe not all of us are celebrating, but sometimes there's something very specific to your locale or to your state. I would love to see more coverage of, I'm a Marylander, and we've got some fairly decent shoreline. I'd love to see more offshore wind produced. And so I might be keeping an eye out for just that kind of article so that I can reply and then say, as a Marylander, I'd love to see that. That would be a really wonderful way to be lighting up my home and my computer. And hopefully we'll get some money out of the Build Back Better Act that would allow us to pursue constructing that offshore wind that we really need.
Yeah. And may I add, I also think that's also a good opportunity of looking at what your representatives or members of Congress are saying as well in response to something like the Build Back Better Act. Kind of what we know right now, right? It passed the House with all Democratic support except Jared Golden of Maine, and now it's moving to the Senate, where in order to pass, they need a clear majority, right? So right now there's Manchin, who has been in the news for months now, who's holding this up and saying, hey, this is just too expensive, right? The costs outweigh the benefits. But if you're local to Manchin, I mean, this is a way where you can respond to some of the comments that might come out on a weekly basis or even daily basis, as they are right now in this news cycle, right? You talk about the spending, which right now it's about 550 billion for climate incentives. Whereas you say, well, hey, excuse me, Representative Manchin, but I found a stat here that during the first 9 months of this year, the climate disasters have cost more than $100 billion. So just in 1 year alone, you're getting a fifth of what this spending what the spending would do, right, in just a year. So not even less than a year, excuse me. So we know climate disasters are going to get worse. We also know the health costs are skyrocketing, right, and very and something that is not talked about often. So, tying back to some of these points that are getting made in the news cycle, just trying to be as relevant. If some other, maybe the imagination, yeah, as Barb said, it might be escaping you, or it's hard for you to find that sort of relevant angle. Get down to the specifics, but again, be very specific in your attack and in your opinion.
So
And several cancers.
that's great. Just by the way, PSR did have a report that we published in July about PFAS chemicals in fracking, being used in fracking, something that most of us in most of the country are totally unaware of. Now we have a new report looking at what PFAS chemicals have been used in the state of Colorado and in what wells. That report will be coming out in about a month, and we hope it'll be the first in a series. That was an aside, just a little bit of pitching there for PSR's reports. But let's just get back to the to our audience. We've got a few more minutes for this webinar. And Julia, can we unmute our people now and see if anybody would like to tell us about a particular letter to the editor that you got printed. Tell us in a little bit more detail what it responded to, how you framed your letter, and why you think it got printed. Julia, can you let us know when our folks are unmuted? I'm afraid everybody's still muted. Okay, well, let's shall we go back to the chat?
Muted. I just didn't have anything really to add to what I already said.
Well, why do you tell people? So you're the one who was a registered nurse, right?
Yeah, that's me.
And what was the point of your letter?
It was at the request of CCAN, and it was about the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And the point of it was to deny a permit that they're still up for. I tied it into an existing article that the local county council had done. And yeah, there was a good tie-in, which was good. And then nurses are popular, so mentioning being one helps. And then in my particular case, I went for the possibility of, natural gas pipeline may increase cancer risk. And unfortunately, I do have an atypical mid-30s breast cancer diagnosis. So I put that in there, which is a little personal, but I think that helped it get published, because the possibility of getting sick is the kind of thing that I think gets a lot of people's attention.
Well, Erica, I'm sorry to hear about your breast cancer, and I hope you'll be beating it soon.
Yep, I'm done with chemo, so that's good. I mean, it should be fine, but I mean, I'm willing to use it to get attention for the environment, and I do think that worked.
Well, that's great. I mean, you are being, as Gregory was saying, you're being personal. You're speaking in your own voice. You're being totally authentic. And I think that the combination of you being a health professional and also acknowledging your own state of health is unusual and pretty attention grabbing. Do we have anybody else who'd like to speak out? There's a note in the chat from Janice Petzl. I know Janice is in Maine. She actually notes that Jared Golden, the one Democrat who voted against the Build Back Better Act, is her representative in Congress. More's the pity. Janice, you've been pretty successful at getting things printed yourself. Would you be interested in speaking up?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think the first big op-ed I got published was with Common Dreams, and you helped with that, I think. And it was about how COVID relates to how the things that cause problems with COVID are similar to what makes climate change such a problem. I live on an island, and so sea level rise is a big deal with us. So I usually bring that in, and then Maine has a lot of problems with air pollution. So usually we bring in issues about, we have very, very high levels of asthma here. So we usually relate climate problems to asthma. The one asking Jared Golden to vote didn't get published. I'm still mad at Jared Golden. I'm going to try again now that you've inspired me to try it again.
Okay, and what will you do to add sparkle to that letter?
That's a good question. You know, he's got a daughter. I mean, he's got a little baby daughter now, and I hate to bring people's families in, but I have a little grandson, and you know, thinking about what the world's going to be like for our children is a big deal to me. I don't know if that'll get him.
That's interesting. It strikes me that it might be slightly slippery slope there. You know, you don't want to seem to be attacking either somebody or their grandchild. But I think the way you framed it a moment ago, that you have a grandchild, and so you're concerned about the future of both of these babies. That sounds it's personal, it's unusual, it's emotion based, and at the same time, it's very positive.
Right. I probably wouldn't mention his child. I wouldn't do that because that's not fair to his child.
Right.
He's a public figure, but she's not.
Yeah, I would only add to that. I mean, it's okay to express your anger or discontent with him as well, right? For that vote, it's okay. I mean, it is one thing to attack and just to share, hey, we're displeased with the way you voted on this key bill that, you know, will provide all these benefits for my children and everyone else's children. You know, I think that's key and it's okay to do, and just really plays into your voice and your feelings towards his action or inaction in this case.
Thank you. Daniel Wolk, you've got your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to contribute to that, this discussion about Representative Golden's child, in that you could tie it in without making it like a personal attack by assuming the best in him and say something like Representative Golden, I really care about the future of our children, and this is what I think we should do about it. We should support our action on climate change and so on, and use it to reinforce your point.
Well, thank you, Daniel. That's a very positive and gracious way, I think, to address, especially to address a politician whom you may be disappointed in. I think it's a good suggestion. Ali Al-Assadi, you and I have been in touch in the past. I believe you're in Arizona, and you had written this attention-grabbing headline about Elon Musk being the smartest idiot. Would you care to add any comments about a letter to the editor that you might care to write?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I definitely. I mean, English is not my native language, and you know sometimes I find it difficult. On the other hand, my son is becoming really an excellent writer. He is in Arizona State University, and what I wrote about Elon Musk was really a response to Erica because she called him the smartest idiot. So I'm like, what if we, rephrase it a little bit? And sometimes I think you get the media attention with the headline. They constantly use it on the 6 o'clock news. Like a father put his child in a microwave, and then people wants to hear that story. Or what is the effect in your health? People care about health, and definitely PSR, in the front line when it's come to that. It just really, the biggest thing for me here in Arizona, I mean, you and I spoke before, it's just pushing the healthy home in a positive way. HUD designated June as a National Healthy Home Month. So I'm here, I'm putting together an event as a celebration, but it's not related only to affordable housing, but it's like in every aspect of the home, whether it's the design, element, whether building material or off-gas in building material that we utilize in home, and then just have like a small bite, like a 20 minutes, just like a talk, like almost like a TEDx talk with multiple speakers. That's all what I have about that. I just really wanted to learn, and I thank you guys for that.
Oh, thank you for speaking up. And it sounds like a great event you're going to be doing. It sounds to me like you should get newspaper coverage of your event, and then we can get people in the Arizona PSR chapter to write letters to the editor talking about what a great event you had and how important these principles are that you refer to. Not everything is the Build Back Better Act. And I don't mean to suggest that that's the only topic we should be writing letters on, not by a long shot. You're talking about the need to be cognizant and sensitive to the climate impacts of all different things that we do in our lives, including how we build our homes. I think that sounds fascinating.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think health is good angle. You and I also, we spoke, my background is in sustainability. I have a green designation, and to appeal to the broader audience, there might not be, you and I, we understand those phrases and language, but with other people, they might associate it with some political agenda or foreign agenda, or they want to take over the country or whatever the fear tactic they use. So health, I think, is indisputable. It's just like a very good angle to go through subject like that, especially with who was the nurse. It definitely, we have a high regard to the medical community, and then when they develop or deliver such a stories, is really will be appealing to the general public.
Well, this is great. So Ali, what you're saying really, once again, projects your identity. It's your personal identity. It's also your professional. Wrap up. I think we've gotten a very clear instruction here about the need to write letters to the editor that reply to something that's in the news, that are short and to the point, maybe even a little bit pointed, and that reflect you and really speak in a voice that is unique, where you bring your identity forward, especially if you're a health professional, and make a statement that will be clear to your reader and that your publisher will want to publish. Gregory, any last words before we wrap up?
No, I think that's a great summary. I will note that on the Jamboard, I'll finish the passionate teacher response, and that was a passionate teacher bridging the learning gap between health and homes, which I think is a great way to put that.
Wow, I do too. I think that should go into a letter to the editor.
Perfect as is. Yeah, no, I think this is great. And, I of course, please don't hesitate to reach out. I don't know if I don't know if you all have my details, but of course through Barb, if there's anything that we can help on or any immediate ideas, I know Barb will be sharing an additional PSR resource about just LTE writing in general. But I hope this was helpful today, and hopefully we all can get more LTEs published in the near future.
Thanks. I actually didn't, let me see if I have that. Gregory was just referencing something that I'd completely forgotten about. Thank you, Gregory. We do have on the PSR website some very simple, more mechanical suggestions about how to write a good LTE and maintain, stick to the guidelines, as Gregory was suggesting earlier. Let me see if I can get that link right here at hand. If I can find it in a moment, I'll print it, put it in the chat. Here we go. Just going to give you some and it's not, the URL is ridiculously long. So here's some instructions. Go to the PSR website, look under resources. In the right-hand box that you choose from, click advocacy materials, and then scroll down and you'll find it. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for participating. This was a slightly unusual kind of a webinar, much more fun. A number of people are telling me that it was instructive, informative, motivating, and inspiring. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and we'll hope to read your letters to the editor in the future. Get anything printed, be sure and send it to us. My email is in the chat. Thank you, everybody. Good night.